Where's Tobias?
Hello and welcome to tonight's Curiosity Club. I am your host this evening. Toby is sick as a dog, and so this is one of the few times I'll be hosting solo. My name is Will Acoma, and I have a number of curious and exciting topics to share with you. As attendees of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club, you're all now members, provided you adhere to our philosophy. Ex curiositas scientia. We pledge to learn without prejudice in pursuit of our mutual goal, perpetual noviceship. We admit that it is impossible to know everything about anything, and thus we remain perpetually curious and perpetually novice. This is our flag and our mascot, Franklin. The lightning bolt represents the receipt of knowledge, the enlightenment of illumination, the resonance of truths understood. It awakens us and excites us and makes us hungry for more. Curiosity Club is made merrier by our fellow artisans at Fort George Brewery in Astoria. And I also want to make a note that to all of our fans and supporters, if you enjoyed tonight's Curiosity Club or have enjoyed past Curiosity Clubs, we would like to ask you to consider a donation. A donation helps cover the cost for staffing and space resources and that we use from Hand-Eye Supply, as well as potential new equipment. Your donation will help keep the Curiosity Club free for everyone. You can donate at http://curiosityclub@handeyesupply.com and click the button at the top right corner. Or you can make a cash donation at the jar in the back. Thank you. Okay, let's give a warm Curiosity Club welcome to Christian Kaylor.
So my name is Christian Kaylor, and I'm a bureaucrat with the state of Oregon, and I study economic statistics for a living. So congratulations, this is the largest group ever assembled that came to listen to a bureaucrat in the government talk about economic statistics. Guinness is here, they're going to be writing this down. So awesome. So let's just dive into the spreadsheets, have fun with it. So I tend to be fairly relaxed about this stuff. We can talk. I sort of have, I think, roughly a tight-ish 18, 20 minutes to go of presentation. So if maybe you could hold off till after the presentation. And that has to do with what I'm going to talk about today, actually. So I've been an economist here in Portland for 16 years next month. So 16 years ago, in the year 2000, back when Al Gore was running for president, I was hired to be the expert on the Portland economy. So the good news is you're talking to someone who has 16 years of experience studying the Portland economy. The bad news is I haven't been promoted in 16 years, so clearly I have issues. But I give a lecture, I talk about the economy to various groups around the region at least once a week. So I tend to do about 50 of these a year, and I've been doing this for a number of years. And so what I wanted to do today is sort of roughly focus in on 3 questions that people are afraid to ask. And what I mean by that is when I go through all the data and I sort of say, oh, here's the fastest growing industries, the slowest growing industries, these are the statistics, here's a spreadsheet, here's another spreadsheet, here's another spreadsheet. As I leave, a lot of people sort of grab me and they sort of lower their voice and they go, okay, well, what's really going on? Like, well, I don't get paid to keep secrets, and maybe if I did, I'd get promoted. But this is what I think is going on. So I'm going to try to answer 3 questions that I get asked most of the time. And instead of laying them out and doing them in stages, I'm just going to tell you what the questions are, and heck, I might even tell you the answers, because I feel like there's too much suspense in the world causing stress. And especially during an election year. So, it's just like, can we just skip to November and just choose somebody and move on with our lives? That would be great. So I'm going to talk about how Portland economy is doing. Is it actually doing well? And second, if it is doing well, why? Why is Portland's economy doing well? And 3, if it's doing so well, why do so many people feel so bad? So I'm going to talk about that, but it's going to be sort of mixed up in these next 20 slides. So first off, This is the Portland region. So catch me, feel free to throw something at me. I'm going to talk mostly about the city of Portland, but before I zoom in, I need to talk about the Portland region. So the Portland region is not just the city of Portland. The city of Portland is about 620,000 people. That's about a fourth of the population. I'm including all of our suburban counties, Clackamas County, Clark County, Washington County, Skamania County, which is a little more rural, 11,000 people out there. Out in Skamania County, 50,000 people out in the St. Helens area, in Columbia County, 100,000 people in Yamhill County. If you combine all of that, you get 2.4 million people. That is equal in population to New Mexico. That is equal in population to Alaska and Idaho combined. So you're talking about a large economic region. So I'm gonna sort of start with that, and then I'm gonna sort of zoom in on Portland, but I'm also gonna sort of zoom out again occasionally to talk about the entire economic region. Because most of the people who work in the city of Portland actually live outside of the city of Portland. They commute in. And there's a fair amount of people actually who live in the city of Portland who commute out as well. So it's what we think of as a labor shed, right? You know, if a job is created, maybe somebody in Beaverton will take the job even if it's in Gresham or vice versa. So this is the region as it looks, and we're doing very well. 163,000 jobs have been created since the bottom of the recession. This is very good. It's some of the strongest job growth in the United States. And over the last 2 years, we've averaged, it's actually kicked up to about 35,000 new jobs created in the last 2 years on an annual basis. We seem to be keeping that pace with the data we've seen so far for 2016. The United States overall is also doing fairly well. 200,000 jobs have been created on average every month in the United States for the last 3 months. This is good. It's down a little bit. I think 2014 we created 3 million jobs in the country. It's now on track to do about 2.5 million, which is what it was doing last year. So this is strong economic growth overall. And in fact, this month is the umpteenth month in a row that the U.S. economy has added jobs, and it's the longest string of job growth in U.S. history. So right now, the U.S. economy overall doing very, very well. The Portland economy doing very, very well. And so that's the end of the presentation. We're doing great, and thanks for coming. But sometimes, as I'm leaving, and after I say these things, again, somebody grabs me and they go, so these are all like barista jobs, right? These are all like tattoo artists and bike shops. Like these aren't good paying jobs, you know, that are being created. And so this is a chart. It's awfully hard to read, but this is it's illustrative. These are the 50 largest cities in America, and there's the city of Portland. It is the 10th highest on the list for average wages for full-time workers at about $65,000 a year. Now we're going to pick that number apart in a minute, but that is disproportionately high. And I think the cities that sort of on the top, you see these frequently, San Francisco, DC, and Seattle. It's not a coincidence, but if you look at the best educated cities in America, San Francisco, Seattle, and DC, again, maybe not necessarily in that order, but the highest wages, most people with college degrees, highly correlated, and there you see very high wages there, but Portland doing awfully well there between, what are we, San Diego and Charlotte, noticeably above Denver, Sacramento, Indianapolis, and there's Detroit on the bottom of the list. Detroit's on the bottom of a lot of lists if you rank economic prosperity in America. Detroit and St. Louis kind of hang out on the bottom of those lists. So believe it or not, wages in Portland are above average. And here's where it continues to get weirder. Those wages for full-time workers, I'm only looking at the mean average for people who have full-time jobs and live in the city of Portland. They may be commuting out to work, but they live in the city of Portland, they have a full-time job. That $65,000 figure, that is up 13%. This is 2014 data, the latest we have, since 2006. For comparison, if I take most of the region, that's actually down, 2%. So whereas the average full-time worker in the Portland region outside the city of Portland has actually seen their wages decline, the average wages for people who live in the city of Portland has gone up sharply in the last decade. This is unusual. We're moving up that list quite quickly. So this is a spreadsheet. I try to disguise it, but I have to admit it's a spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is about something called wage polarization. And I have many friends and colleagues. Some of them are colleagues and enemies, but some of them are friends and colleagues. That's nice. And I try to do that. Who really study this. And they like to make charts of it. And so I tried to make a chart of this, but I found it challenging to do. But like I said, some colleagues of mine have done it. I've played around with it. So I ultimately sort of just gave up and made a spreadsheet out of it. But I colored it in these nice candy colors. so that it would be friendly. I didn't just want to say, look, spreadsheet. I think this is the only time I'm going to do this in this presentation, but this is a spreadsheet. And what I did was I took the largest industry sectors in the Portland region, this is the overall region, and I ranked them from highest wage to lowest wage. And I just said, okay, let's see what's going on here. So there's high-tech manufacturing at, what is it, about $130,000 a year is the mean average payroll for high-tech workers in the region. About 1/3 of all manufacturing jobs in the Portland region are high-tech. Disproportionately in Washington County is where those jobs are located. In Washington County, the majority of manufacturing jobs, about 60%, are high-tech manufacturing. Then they pay very, very, very well. So it's our highest wage industry. As we go down, we see information. There's a lot of software IT in there that's been doing very well the last few years. There we see professional and technical. I'm going to talk about what's in that in a second, but as a preview, law offices, engineering offices, accounting offices are all under there. Financial activities, wholesale trade often throws people. So some of our major corporations in the area that may not actually make the stuff, but maybe have overseas suppliers make stuff, and they may not retail the stuff. So companies you might have heard of like Adidas or Columbia or Fred Meyer, where they need a lot of corporate headquarters type staff to plan logistically the supply and shipping and global velocity reports. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up now. I don't really know what's involved. But these are high wage corporate sorts of jobs with names you've sort of heard of, but the clothes aren't usually made in America anymore, and they may be retail distributed anywhere in the world. So, but the logistical work of doing that is wholesale trade, also pays very well. Ambulatory healthcare, that's all the clinics, psychiatrists, psychologists, veterinarians, they're all in there, chiropractors, all in healthcare. And I made this spreadsheet originally for one reason, and that was to puncture the myth that all of the job growth in the region in this economic recovery were low wage. So I took all of those jobs combined and I looked back 10 years. So I looked at the 2015 data and I looked at the 2005 data, and I said, look, we've actually, those industries, if you take all these high wage industries that have average wages 70, 80,000 plus salaries in those businesses, that's 14% job growth over the last 10 years. That's actually faster than the rest of the economy as a whole, about 11% for the region. So we're actually creating lots of high wage jobs, and there they are. Unfortunately, the myth is true in blue. So then I ranked some of the lowest wage jobs, and I started with something, we call it employment services. That's government bureaucrat for temp agencies. And those people can be sent anywhere, but they tend to be lower skill, lower paid jobs, at least in short term, and hopefully do better with that. There's retail, nursing and residential care. I'll say something about nursing and residential care. The most common occupation in nursing and residential care is CNA, Certified Nursing Assistant. The average wage for CNA is $14 an hour. So if you visit a family member or a loved one in a hospital or a retirement home and a care facility, look at the work they're doing and think about the challenge there. Think about whether you'd want that job. I mean, it's extremely challenging. And then just think about, they're making $14 an hour. That's the average wage in the Portland area. These are folks who are working incredibly hard, very challenging, very important work. And luckily, hopefully, many of them will be helped by these minimum wage increases that are coming down the pipe. But what does it say about society that we value those sorts of positions there? So registered nurses make $80,000, $85,000 a year, typically $40 to $45 an hour. So you might, when you're in a healthcare environment, you'll see somebody in scrubs and they'll come in and they'll sort of help somebody. But there's a massive difference in wages for registered nurses who typically have bachelor's degrees and CNAs who typically don't have much formal education or training at $14 an hour. So just something to be aware of. So that's one of our faster growing industries as the baby boomers get a little bit older there and the lower wages. And unfortunately, if you cluster those all together, we are seeing faster job growth in that lower end. The real problem, though, and I didn't know this when I made this, is that if you take the middle wage industries, government, non-high-tech manufacturing, again, 2/3 of all manufacturing in the Portland region is not high-tech. It's plastic or metals or wood products, clothing, food, a lot of food, actually. And government, so school districts. The average middle school teacher in the Portland area makes $55,000 a year. Cops make about $60,000, $65,000 a year, about the same as firefighters. You have a lot of really sort of middle wage jobs clustered right there, and that's where we see the slowest job growth. These are all roughly equal in size. About 250,000 people in the Portland region work in each of these three groups, and this is the problem. So we've seen essentially no job growth in the industries which typically drive middle class economic growth, middle class jobs, they're just not growing. That's problematic because it breaks the bell curve. We start to see very, very strange numbers pop up. So this is income by household just for the city of Portland. And I'm going to go out to the region here in a couple of slides, but just take a moment here. The median household income in the Portland area is about $60,000 a year. That's in the middle. Do you notice anything about households making $35,000 to $75,000 a year? Since the bottom of the recession in 2010, we've actually lost them. That's very, very strange. So the middle of the bell curve is actually dropping down. This is unusual, to say the least. And you'll see tremendous growth. We've added over 22,000 households just in 4 years, just in the city of Portland, making $75,000 plus, with some of the fastest growth in the $200,000 income range. This is really sort of distorting everything. And this is where I tell the Bill Gates joke. And I'm sure some people have heard the Bill Gates joke. When you become an economist, they tell you jokes to help you remember things because we drink a lot. And it's hard to remember a lot of economic concepts when you drink too much. This is for awareness. There's a bar, and there's two economists sitting at the bar. And there's like 20 people in the bar. There's bartenders, people hanging out. And Bill Gates walks into the bar. And one economist turns to the other economist, and he says, "Hooray, we're rich." And the economist goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "The average person in this bar is a billionaire. You take the total income of everybody in the room, and you divide it out, and guess what? We're all billionaires." Well, obviously, that's not how the real world works, but with data like $65,000 number out, and people go, well, wait a second, the city of Portland is like the 10th wealthiest city in America for income. Like that doesn't quite maybe jibe with what we think about the city of Portland. And wait, that number has gone up 13%, whereas the rest of the suburbs actually declined. This is hard to understand. Now, this isn't necessarily Bill Gates. Obviously, Bill Gates is still in Seattle. He hasn't moved to Portland yet. Let's not encourage him. These numbers will get very strange. But essentially, this is what's happening. We're seeing disproportionate growth in the high end, and that's pulling up the average wage. At the same time that these middle income households are actually declining somewhat. And the city of Portland is very unique here. We've actually lost 8,000 households. Most of the suburban communities, Washington County, Clackamas County, Clark County, have added low-income households. So again, that's what's sort of pulling them down as the city of Portland on average is going up. But we need to kill average because average is now broken. The bell curve with this is essentially broken. If you look at this same chart, this is for the entire Portland metro region, and you look by tier, and this is individuals who are working full-time, and again, you see on the right, 35% growth. We've added almost 30,000 new jobs, folks who earn a six-figure income, who work full-time. That's sort of that Bill Gates effect, is just pulling that average way up. You would expect this chart to look like a bell curve, but this is the opposite of a bell curve. You see individuals making $35,000 to $50,000, which is about the average in the region for full-time workers. It's actually declining by 7%. This is an economic recovery. So take a bell curve, flip it upside down, and that's what the income distribution looks like. You can literally see the middle class shrinking in this chart. It's not I always thought of that as a metaphor, an analogy, that there was some sort of pressure being put on the middle class. When I made this chart, I didn't actually expect to see it actually shrinking. And this isn't an economic recovery. This isn't the recession. This is the recovery. Very strange. And of course, lower income households and workers growing in percentage. So let me just talk about why average is broken and why that matters. When the Oregonian calls me and a business reporter calls me and they say, hey, all these jobs are being created, it's great, I heard the presentation, all these jobs are being created. What are the wages like? And I'm on a deadline, I just have a few minutes. And I'll just say, well, the average wage now is, for the city of Portland, $65,000 a year, and that's noticeable, it's up 13% from last year, so they're up. And they go, okay, great, so wages are up in the Portland area, and that's just where it gets written. And I'm as to blame as the reporter is. It's just how we do it, because we all assume that average describes the population, right? Whether we're aware, whether we've studied statistics or not, we imagine a bell curve in our minds. And when I say the average is in the middle of this bell curve, I mean, when I say average, you imagine that that is the center of the bell curve. And that, sure, there are some people who make a little more than that, and some people make a little less than that. But on average, most people are sort of about around the average, and that does a good job of describing a population. That's broken. It no longer works. So when someone says wages are going up, and I hear it on the radio, I mean, I read a lot of economic reports, or going down or whatever, I go, well, you're describing an average of a population that is actually moving in two different directions simultaneously. The average may be good or it may be bad, but it really doesn't describe the overall population at all. And it makes our job much, much harder as economists when we get a reporter who just says, look, I just have 5 minutes. I'm just going to put you on the radio for 30 seconds. I just need a blurb. What's going on with wages? Go. What am I going to do? I'm going to say, oh, well, wages are up 13% for the average person in Portland, even though that doesn't make any sense to a large chunk of the population. So where are these jobs being created? This is unusual, to say the least. In the lifetime of every person in this room, we've never seen this. And I say that because I've been showing this chart, and I've had people sort of argue this with me. And so I've gone back several decades. This just goes back the last 10 years. But there's Multnomah County in black, and that's the number of jobs Multnomah County has created every year for the last 10 years. Washington County is in red, Clackamas County is in green. And you'll sort of notice something right away. Multnomah County, for the last 5 or 6 years, has created more jobs than the second largest county in Oregon, Washington County, and the third largest county in Oregon, Clackamas County, even though both of those counties combined are larger than Multnomah County, and they have more jobs. It's grown more than both of those combined for the last 5 years straight. That's the opposite of what we know. Historically, and when I mean historically, I mean way back 10 years ago, growth tended to be in the suburban counties, Clackamas County, Washington County, Clark County. They are growing, but at a noticeably slower rate than they did just 10 years ago. Multnomah County grew 10 years ago, but it's growing much more jobs than it did 10 years ago. So this is a total flip from what we know. Historically, jobs have been out in these suburban areas. They haven't been in the city of Portland. And I follow the business news a little closer maybe than the average person, but we see this repeatedly in the newspaper. So last year, there was a semiconductor company in Hillsboro. You're talking about Silicon Forest, right? Lattice Semiconductor. They had 200 employees. They closed the facility, they sold it, and they relocated those 200 employees to a building 2 blocks from here. Well, more than 2, but Big Pink on Burnside. So here you have a high-tech company leaving the Silicon Forest to be in downtown Portland. This year, Wacom is it's a Japanese company. They make the graphic arts supplies, the tablets and the pencils that write the digital stuff. It's really great. Industry leader. It's a Japanese corporation. Their North American headquarters is in Vancouver until this year. And it is relocating a few blocks that way in the Pearl District. Next year, ZoomCare. People know ZoomCare is really great. They are headquartered in Hillsboro until January 1st of 2017, when they will be relocating to the city of Portland. They'll just be blocks away from here. So there's 3 examples, they're anecdotal, of 3 internationally competitive global corporations moving from the suburbs into the city. And in each case, in their press release saying, we want to be closer to where the workforce is. I'll get more into that in the next few slides, but I want to get more to the geography a little bit. So this is a nice map of the city of Portland, and these are census tracts. So I made this map, and back to this idea of full-time workers. So I said, okay, if $65,000 is the mean average for a full-time worker, but you know, neighborhoods, you live in Portland, there's some neighborhoods that are very, very wealthy. I certainly couldn't afford to live in them. There are other neighborhoods that are a little different. So what does that look like? So I created 3 tiers. In the dark gray here, you'll see these are neighborhoods, keep this in mind, where the average person who has a job, a full-time job, who lives in that neighborhood makes a 6-figure income or more. On the other hand, on the palest one, the sort of pale yellow there, those are neighborhoods where the average person with a full-time job makes less than $50,000 a year. So the wage discrepancy between those 2 geographies is at least 2 to 1, usually more. it is very hard to describe a community when you have large communities within it where people make less than half of what other people in that community make. And so I'll just sort of illustrate this out here. The census makes these very pretty maps, but doesn't label them very well. There's Lake Oswego, infamous Lake Oswego for very high incomes, some of the highest in the state. The two highest wage census tracts in the state of Oregon are actually in the West Hills there. I didn't bother circling them. Lake Oswego, though, I think has the third and fourth. $172,000 is the mean average wage for people who work full-time in Lake Oswego. It's incredibly high. It's by far the highest in the state of a community, of a city. It's in Clackamas County there. But you'll see just across from Milwaukee, just across the river there, there's a Lewis and Clark campus. That's far south Portland there. $160,000 a year. And so that sort of describes a lot of the West Hills there, well over $100,000 a year. There's Bull Mountain near Tigard, $110,000. And the West Hills, on the other side of the West Hills in Washington County, the very top of the West Hills is the dividing line between Multnomah and Washington County. And so the wealthiest concentration in Washington County is actually right there on Skyline. It's just on the other side of where you can see from the city of Portland. But there's the Pearl District, $104,000 a year. I first visited Portland in July of 1994 to come to a conference, and I was a teenager at the time. And I was very excited because there was this bookstore called Powell's, and it was awesome, and I just hung out there, and they closed at midnight. I don't know if they still close at midnight, but Ursula K. Le Guin gave a speech. I thought that was cool, and then I hung out, and at midnight they said I had to leave. And so I left, and I didn't really know Portland very well, so I just sort of walked around. I accidentally walked around the Pearl District in 1994. People who were in Portland in 1994 kind of know, and it was my first trip, so I'm not like a native particularly. Yeah, I saw some things in the Pearl District at midnight in the 90s that I have never seen since. That was a trip. To say today that the average person who has a full-time job who lives in the Pearl District makes over $100,000 a year, that is a radical economic transformation. Nothing like that has happened in the state of Oregon in the last 20 years. It's really incredible. There's Alameda, 105,000, Laurelhurst, 110, and Eastmoreland, 103. On the other hand, we have these communities. I want to point this one out first. This is an interesting conversation I've been having with my friends out in Washington County. One of the least, how do I want to frame this? One of the poorest census tracts in the state of Oregon is actually downtown Hillsboro. That's the heart of high-tech manufacturing in Oregon. That is the heart of Silicon Forest. That is a 10-minute bike ride from Intel. I mean, it's just crazy. And yet, the average person with a full-time job who lives in downtown Hillsboro, $30,000 a year. I mean, it's just incredible. And there's Milwaukee. Milwaukee's maybe a 5-minute bike ride from Eastmoreland, which we just saw in the last slide, $50,000 a year. So just incredible, even not that far away from each other. It's not like it's way across the town, tracks, it's way across town. And then you sort of see this line here along 205. There's Lance, Eastport Plaza, Clackamas Town Center, places where the average person, I'm not looking at the entire population, I'm just picking on people who have full-time jobs who are making essentially poverty wages. Imagine if you're a single parent with 2 kids, working full-time, paying for daycare, making $30,000 to $35,000 a year. That's the average income in these communities. And that sort of stretches out into Gresham, $30,000, $35,000 a year is quite common out in the Rockwood area. So I teased this a little bit ago. Why? That was the second question. As you might remember, I started with 3 questions. You've probably forgotten by now, but that's okay. I remember. So why is Portland doing so well? And I told you about these companies that are relocating into the city of Portland, specifically leaving the suburbs. This again, for native Oregonians, I'm from Eugene originally. I moved to Portland when I got this job in 2000, but this is very, very strange. Deschutes County, that's where Bend is. Jackson County is where Medford is. Marion County is where Salem is. And Lane County, that's where I'm from. 3 generations of my family live there. That's the Eugene-Springfield area. In the 1990s, those 4 counties grew about 4 times more people in the 90s than the city of Portland did. So that was a typical year, average year in the 1990s, about 4,000 or 5,000 people a year coming to the city of Portland every year, but 4 times that in these 4 counties. And those are the 4 largest counties outside the Portland region, after Clackamas and Washington County, which is the 2nd and 3rd largest counties. And here's the last 4 years. So there's been a total shift. So the city of Portland is now adding people at twice the rate it did 20 years ago. At the same time, these other major counties, and I'm including Bend in here, are growing noticeably slower than they did 20 years ago. Unfortunately, a big part of my job is working with planners, government people that are thinking about transportation, land use needs, social service needs, looking out 10 or 20 years. They've lived here for a while, and the mentality is that the 90s was normal. And it still is. And it's one of the reasons I'm giving this presentation. This is a very different environment than our last strong economic growth that we enjoyed in the 1990s. And demographics are very strange. So who are these people? Who are these people that are moving to the city of Portland in such large numbers? And apparently, who are these people not moving to the rest of Oregon, these very nice places around Oregon, like Eugene? What's going on there? And so, you peel through demographic data, and there's 85 different ways to slice and dice that data. And I haven't done all 85, but I've done probably 30. And I noticed something. So as a labor economist, I said, OK, I'm not going to look at children. I'm not going to look at seniors. I'm not going to look at people over 65. And I'm very interested in the educated workforce, people with college degrees, 4-year degree plus, maybe a master's or a PhD. Let's just look at people with a bachelor's degree. And that's when it lit up. Since 2010, 2014 is the latest census data we have, the city of Portland has added almost 30,000 people with a college degree, working age. Looking at that demographic for the rest of Oregon, the city of Portland is 15% of the population of the state of Oregon, but it is the majority of growth in this demographic. Again, very, very strange. There's Clackamas County and Washington County. There's Silicon Forest is right there. You see Washington County, Yamhill County, Lane County. You'll notice Douglas County on the bottom. It's very hard to compare counties when you have negative numbers. And unfortunately, many places in Oregon, they are actually losing their workforce, their skilled, educated workforce. And Douglas County is one of those counties that's doing that. So the city of Portland is the economic driver in the state of Oregon at the same time that it's the population driver. What I'm getting at here is a riddle in economics. And the riddle is this. What comes first, right? People know the chicken and the egg, right? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? So in economic development around the state, when you go to communities that are challenged, and there are many communities that are challenged, and when we go to them, we visit, and they say, well, what we need is good jobs, because if we had some good jobs, people would move here to take the good jobs. So places like Douglas County, where they have fewer jobs now than they did 15 years ago, and they have fewer people, well, they don't have fewer people, they have fewer college graduates than they did 15 years ago. They want to break that cycle, right? So they say, OK, we're going to get the good jobs. We're going to go out, we're going to give some economic development money, we're going to do what we need to do, a marketing campaign. If we can get one company to locate here, the people will then follow. And then as the people follow, other businesses, knowing that they have a smart, educated workforce, will then move and will enter a virtuous circle that Portland is currently enjoying. The problem is, I mentioned 3 other companies, so I'll pick on one last one. Anyone here ever heard of Roseburg Timber? Roseburg Forest Products? A couple people? Been in Oregon for a while. So in 1937, during the Great Depression, this company was formed in Roseburg, and they call it Roseburg Forest Products. It's great, and it's still there, and it's still working. So they were in the news recently. You might have heard. So it's hard to get more Roseburg-based than Roseburg Forest Products. It is by far the largest private company in Douglas County. They have mills. They have their corporate headquarters there. They buy and sell product throughout the world. And so they had an announcement last year. They're leaving Roseburg. Now this isn't owned by a foreign company. This is a family-owned company for generations in Roseburg. You know, it's a very difficult decision. And they said, we have to leave Roseburg. We cannot attract talent that is globally competitive to come live in Roseburg. Now they're moving, this is funny to me because I'm from Eugene, they're moving to Springfield, which is sort of, but I go, Springfield? But in their press release, they said, look, Roseburg doesn't have an airport. Roseburg doesn't have a university. You know, they went to, you can still see it, it's on their website. They don't have the basic attractors that we need. And so Eugene has those attractors. And Springfield is very, very close to us. Those are Eugene. But they have the university. They have the airport. People know, they've heard of Eugene. We can attract the talent we need in that community. So, you know, this is the uphill battle that so many communities around America, I'm picking on Roseburg, face. And now they're losing a corporation. They're going to lose people. And they're in a downward spiral. So like I said, the riddle for a long time, and people said, no, what you need to do is attract people, and then the jobs will follow. No, you attract the jobs, and the people follow. I'm just going to cut the Gordian knot and say they're linked like this. You can't really pull them apart. But if one of them isn't working, whether it's the economy or being able to attract skilled labor, neither of them work. In the Portland area, both are feeding very nicely. This is unfortunate. So this is another one. I made this chart about a month ago because I was reading in, I don't know, online somewhere, and somebody was just sort of some culture reporter for Willamette Week, somebody said something along the lines of, oh, everybody knows Portland isn't very diverse. It's the whitest city in America. And I just sort of thought, oh, yeah. So I took an hour, and I pulled the census data, and I said, I'm sure it's not the whitest city in America. Guess what? So I took the 50 largest cities. I didn't take every city in America, but I took the 50 largest cities in America, and I ranked them by diversity. And the city of Portland, and I know it's hard to read, but I just want to point out a couple things. Omaha, Nebraska is number 3 on this list. Where's Wichita, Kansas? Show me Wichita. Wichita, Kansas, about 8th on this list. So a little over 70% of the population that lives in the city of Portland is white, non-Hispanic. And looking around the room today, you would believe it. So this is perhaps, unfortunately, in a strange way, a blessing because this has been driving our immigration, right? We get college-educated people who are white. White people make more money than people of color, and our income numbers go up. Displacing people of color probably isn't an awesome economic development strategy. So far, it's what we're doing. The African American population in the city of Portland in the last 5 years has declined by 1/8. There are 1/8 fewer African Americans living in the city today than there were 5 years ago. That is a crisis, and it isn't being discussed enough. The key to all of this, and I know some of you are hearing in the back of your head, is the word gentrification. We're moving in lots and lots of people with college degrees who are younger, great, who are white, and making it less affordable for lower income people who disproportionately, at least one group as an indicator, people of color, such as the African American population. We're not only monoculture, we're not only not very diverse, we aren't becoming more diverse. In a country that's increasingly becoming more diverse, and you see these cities here where you see a lot of diversity. This is a problem. I personally know people who were recruited to the city of Portland to work for companies in this town, blocks from this building, of color, who left after a year or two because they didn't have a large enough group of their own community here, whatever that was. The race or religion, and if you want details, you can ask me after the speech, but I specifically know individual people who really tried to make a go of it. This puts us at a competitive disadvantage. Half the world's population lives in Asia. We are a globally competitive city. To be globally competitive means you have relationships with people around the world who look different than I do, who worship differently. Well, everyone worships differently than I do. I don't worship, but who worship differently. This is important. This is our global competitiveness, and we're losing this race. This will hurt us for years to come, because where is an internationally competitive corporation going to want to locate? In a place where they have workers who literally speak the language. And we literally don't have people who speak the language because of our lack of diversity. So population growth. The city of Portland's growing very, very fast. Since 2010, 6% growth, 2010 to 2014. This is also very unusual. We are growing as a city twice as fast as the rest of the state of Oregon. And one of the questions I got asked repeatedly, I would show this and I'd say, wow, Portland's growing so fast, it's growing faster in the suburbs. This is very unusual. Again, we haven't seen this in generations. It's been since the 1940s that we've seen the city of Portland grow faster than the suburban counties. So what's going on? One of the things that was very interesting, I looked at the 50 largest cities in America, and I found that about a third of them were growing faster than the rest of the state at a noticeable rate. I mean, some of them were very, very close. But I found about 17 of the 50, so about a third, growing noticeably faster than the rest of the state. So it is not common. Most major cities in America are not growing faster than the rest of the region. But it's not totally uncommon either. Again, about a third. Portland is one of those, 6% versus 3% our population growth. San Francisco, Seattle, Denver, Austin, but it's not just West Coast. City of Atlanta growing noticeably faster than the state of Georgia. And the city of Chicago. If it wasn't for the city of Chicago, Illinois would not be growing at all at this point. So this is a new phenomenon in America, but it is not particularly common. We can identify other cities in America that are growing faster, with this demographic change, but most of them aren't. But Portland isn't necessarily alone. It's uncommon. And again, because of these college graduates, we've come to an interesting place. If you look at prime age workers, workers in their late 30s, early 40s, just to pick on them for a moment, you'll see the city of Portland now, 54% have a bachelor's degree or more. So in 1970, 10% of Americans had a bachelor's degree. And I often work with baby boomers, and they also, I think, they have some difficulty with this concept. So I've worked with baby boomers who say, look, not everybody needs a college degree. College degrees are for like really smart, high-paid, competitive office workers, make a lot of money. It's an elite certification. You're better educated, but you're in a small group. So the bachelor's degree in the city of Portland, it's not that elite if most people have it. It goes from being a nice to have to a need to have. To get just about any job, not just a high-wage corporate office management job, to get just about any job, to stand out, you need a bachelor's degree. I work with a lot of businesses in my job, and I work on planning, recruiting, and I work with these companies that require bachelor's degrees. And sometimes they struggle to hire. And so I chat with them about it, and I look at the position, I say, this position, why do you require a bachelor's degree for this job? I don't see why you would necessarily need a bachelor's degree for this job. HR is using that as a screening technique just to winnow down the resumes they get. If you go on the web, on Monster or Indeed, and you as a business say, hey, we're in Portland and we're hiring and we pay decent wages, you're going to get 10,000 resumes emailed to you within 24 hours. I mean, oh, hey, sure, I'd love to move to Portland. Portland's great. We all love Portland. So what do? To cut that pile down of resumes they're going to go through to figure out who they're going to interview, bachelor's degree, for jobs that they will admit don't require a bachelor's degree skills. They're just trying to winnow down the pile of applicants. So the city of Portland's enjoying that. And the city of Vancouver at 25%. So I showed that one earlier with the income chart. Before this recession, about 10 years ago, the average income differential between the city of Portland and Vancouver, which is the largest suburban city in the Portland area, was 7%. The average worker in the city of Portland made 7% more than the average worker in Vancouver. Today it's 30%. 10 years ago, the differential between Portland and Gresham was 30%. It's now 50%, 50%. So the average person with a full-time job in Portland makes 50% more than the average person in Gresham, who is much less likely to have a college degree. Education drives a lot of this. And so to go back to the job side for a moment, the job side of this riddle, this is our fastest growing industry. This isn't just Portland's fastest growing industry, it's Oregon's fastest growing industry. It's not just Oregon's fastest growing industry, it's Seattle's fastest growing industry. It's Spokane's fastest growing industry. It is the United States of America's fastest growing industry. It's called professional and technical services, and I wrote up a little short thing on what that is. It's growing twice as fast as the rest of the economy for jobs. And good news, it pays wages 43% higher than the average job. Really good wages, close to $80,000 a year. And there's a list of example occupations and the average wage they pay in the Portland area, so you can sort of illustrate that out a little bit. Here's the thing. Multnomah County. The city of Portland is 88% of Multnomah County for jobs. So Multnomah County is sort of as low as we break these sort of data points out with. City of Portland dominates Multnomah County. There are more jobs in employment and technical services and more growth in employment and technical services than the rest of the state of Oregon combined. Now, Multnomah County is 20% of the population, but it is a majority of the growth in the fastest growing industry, which pays the highest wages. So that, again, is just pushing those numbers up. And I'm often asked, okay, all these people, they're hip, they're cool, they want to be in Portland because they love the nightlife or something. But why would the businesses locate there? Well, they are. And in many cases, it's to be as close as possible to the workforce they actually have. So my last two slides, thanks for hanging in here. This is very different as you look around the city. So this is East Portland. I've sort of graded in with my awesome map making skills there. You see pretty much east of 205 82nd Street. The poverty rate there is 25%. Identical to the poverty rate for the city of Gresham there. That's 26,000 people living in poverty in Gresham, 30,000 people in East Portland. If you add in Troutdale, Fairview, and Wood Village, you get 65,000 people living in poverty, essentially east of 82nd Street. So this is all very ironic because here's Multnomah County. 35% of all job growth in the last 5 years in the state of Oregon is out of Multnomah County. It's the fastest job growth, it's the most job growth, and it's disproportionately high wage. And yet, the greatest concentration of poverty in the county is in Multnomah County. As many people live in poverty in East Portland, Gresham, as do in, well, that's all of the North Coast and all of North Central and Northeastern Oregon. So it is the largest grouping of poverty in the state. Here's the problem. When federal and state anti-poverty programs decide where to spend money, they look at the numbers like the ones I started with. And they go, oh, Multnomah County doesn't need money, it's wealthy. I made this slide for them because the food stamp program, it's called SNAP, January 1st, slashed benefits in Oregon. There's 36 counties in Oregon. They slashed benefits in 2 counties, Washington and Multnomah County. So think about that for a moment. If you live in one of 34 counties, no change. But if you live in the county that has the greatest concentration of poverty in the state of Oregon, your food stamp benefits were cut January 1st. That's insane. And it's my fault. Because I always start out the presentation, I go, well, look, average wages are really high. And they're getting higher. And look at all the growth in Multnomah County. But you have this massive pocket, and it's totally being overlooked. That is not the only government program that is slashing benefits in Multnomah County because it says, oh, well, Multnomah County's doing great. On average, it is doing great. But the average now lies. And that is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. No questions at all? No. Yes?
So that was amazing. You work for Economic Development Agency, the state.
No, he doesn't.
Okay, you work for the state.
I do.
So
with Economic.
my question's about the Gordian knot.
Yeah.
The jobs pulling the talent, or does the talent pull the jobs?
Mm-hmm.
I've had like a pine in me, but so just simplify it. Seems like this happened. In Portland, we ended up with more talent than jobs for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And as to why, well, I think because we had cool white people things happening, like bands and donuts and heroin and tattoos and various other delights. And so this aggregation of workforce talent brought in all this industry, and then there's this sort of multiplying effect out of, so here's my question. If let's look at the PDC. The PDC decided that the way to fix Portland, starting from the mid-90s or much before, was to make sure that everyone was like that those incomes were just up everywhere. Basically saying sort of for improvement of whatever we're going to do, we're going to go where it's poor and make it more rich.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was cool because it was poor, have they got it backwards?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know, and I don't know that it's totally fair to blame economic development strategies. I think overall, you know, Oscar Wilde said, "When the gods wish to punish us, they answer our prayers." And thank you, by the way, for saying it's amazing. This is my life's work, so good. You know, this isn't like a hobby. This is like I get up in the morning thinking about it. And I have been in a number of meetings with economic development for many, many years, and a couple people in this room. And I think that if I was in a meeting 10, 15, 20 years ago, and I was, especially when the recession was bad. So 2002, Oregon had the highest unemployment rate out of all 50 states. And that was very annoying because I talked to a lot of reporters, and every question I got at the end of the interview or whatever I was going to talk about, and they'd say, does Oregon still have the highest unemployment rate out of all 50 states? Yes, Oregon still has the highest unemployment rate. Okay, and you know, that was the story. Month after month after, I went for 14 months straight, and that's still true. So when you're the governor of Oregon, and the headlines keep coming out that Oregon has the highest unemployment rate month after month because people were still moving here. Even as the jobs left, people were moving in.
It was cool.
Well, but that was keeping our numbers. I would go out and I'd pick on other states like Kentucky or something. I mean, I'd find specific states that were hit as hard for job loss as Oregon. And I go, look, you know, to your point, you know, there are other communities that have lost jobs, but they keep moving to Oregon. They're not moving to Kentucky. You know, when you lose your job in Kentucky, you leave Kentucky. But for some reason, when you lose your job in Oregon, you stick around for a while and you invite your friends who are unemployed to come hang out. And so that fed what you say. And you know, the governor pounds on the table and says, I want jobs, jobs, jobs. And we've done it. I mean, it's a success. The max was a bold experiment in the 80s, and it's a success. The Willamette River, it's a success.
We killed the golden goose if it was only successful because it's cool, and it's cool because it's cheap.
Well, and you make a great point with cheap. So San Francisco and Seattle are walking point on this. And Portland is like hanging out behind them. And you saw in a couple of those lists, Seattle and San Francisco well above us. And I mention Seattle and San Francisco a lot because people go, look, Portland's over. I think this is a sketch actually in Portlandia, but Portland's over. It's become too expensive. It can't continue this. And I go, you know, San Francisco and Seattle are actually growing very quickly, and they even have higher wages than we do. And if you look at their traffic issues, you know, much worse than Portland. If you look at housing affordability, much worse than Portland. So they're exploring new levels of how unaffordable can you be until you drive people out of your city. And I think it's probably almost an open strategy now in city council meetings. You know, maybe if the traffic gets bad enough, some of these people will leave and our housing prices will get down a little bit, traffic a little bit better. So unfortunately, those examples, Portland has room. And I don't know at what point we get there, but Seattle and San Francisco are trying to find it, and they haven't found it yet. And that is part of Portland's competitive advantage compared to Seattle and San Francisco. Well, traffic's wonderful, housing's totally affordable. And that's been driving a lot of our growth the last 10 years. Yes?
And notice in the census tract data, a couple of, in my mind, conspicuous neighborhoods of wealth. And I'm wondering, that does the nuances of the census tract data don't capture, because it's income-based, doesn't capture non-traditional income, like thinking of places like Alameda Ridge and Labs Edition.
Yeah.
Irvington.
It's trying to capture earnings. So if you're getting stock market dividends, I think that's a question in there. But if if you've got a pile of Van Goghs in the basement and you only made $10,000 that year, I think census says you made $10,000. So there's no adjustment for net worth. Surveys on net worth are incredibly depressing, by the way, if you ever look at them. Like, there's so many people who have net worth like $5,000 or something. Savings rates are so low. So yeah, I mean, arguably, this might be understating some of the issues. And that is that some of these folks are making six-figure incomes, aren't just making six-figure incomes. They have millions of dollars in savings. They have millions of dollars in trust funds. They may have intergenerational wealth that they can call upon. So that wealth disparity might actually easily be much, much more than what you've seen there. It's not really measurable, though. Yes?
I'm a transportation planner and a project manager at CH2M, so I see stuff like this all the time. One comment and a question. It would be fantastic. I really enjoyed your presentation. It would be great if it would be helpful if you could cite some of your data sources. But I have a great concern over the middle wage jobs that are not growing, and I'm curious, what were some of your findings? Why do you think that that's occurring, and what could we do as planners to reverse that?
Probably nothing. And I screwed up. So I made it through the whole presentation. That was good. And a couple of questions. So there's an election going on. And what's interesting is both on the left and right. And so if you look at the US economy today compared to the last 100 years, you see a few odd things. But if you stand back and squint, the economy is in excellent shape. The unemployment rate in the US last month was 4.9%. The Portland area is 4.3%. Inflation is basically zero. Job growth has been strong now for a record run. And yet, you have on both wings, politically, well, whatever wings these people belong to, you have two candidates who are doing very well and getting millions of votes who are hitting the same arguments about middle class, essentially. And they're angry, and they're proud of being angry, and they yell a lot. Portland doesn't have this issue as much, but I just named 3 corporations that are moving their headquarters to downtown Portland. How do you feel if you live in the community that's losing the headquarters? How do you feel if your Carrier, it's a company's called Carrier, makes air conditioners in Indiana, and they shut down the plant and they said, look, we're moving to a developing country. Most places in Portland, in the United States, outside of Portland, they're losing jobs even in this economic recovery. And I think part of what's happening politically is the stock market's doing great, the last 6 years. The unemployment's low, inflation's low. But there's large parts of this country, the Rust Belt in the industrial Northeast, Wisconsin, Minnesota, upstate New York, Indiana, the Chicago area. Just follow the Mississippi River down, Cincinnati, Cleveland. You have large chunks of this country where they have not recovered the jobs they lost in the recession. There are fewer jobs today than there were 10 years ago. So when the President of the United States stands up and goes, look, here's all these great economic statistics, GDP numbers are great, the stock market's great, inflation's down. Well, but my factory's still gone and it's not coming back because I live in Indiana or Kentucky or Buffalo, New York. I'm angry. And in fact, I'm even more angry because there are clearly some people who are doing quite well and there's others who aren't. The drivers behind that, this is a big hot topic globally, what's going on with the middle class. And particularly with manufacturing, global competition just goes up every year. I have a friend of mine, and he was really excited because China's having a lot of struggles right now, and he was really excited, and he said, oh good, China's having a lot of challenges, so that'll be good for the US. And I just said, look, it's basic macroeconomics. If China struggles economically, their currency will decrease. As their currency becomes cheaper relative to the US, their exports become more competitive. And US exports become less competitive. It actually hurts manufacturing. You actually want China to do better economically. You want Mexico to do better economically. And I think politically, I don't know how I can insert myself in all these political debates. When people talk about, we need to beat China, we need to beat Japan, we need to beat Europe, like, no. They're our consumers. You want them to do well. If they're poor, they will low bid you on manufacturing, which is now an international competitive game. So that's driving some of this. I think the internet has just increased that globally and also locally. I didn't go through a lot of these. Sometimes believe it or not, when I have more time, I go through some of these. Retail is one of the slowest growing industries we have, both nationally and locally. And the theory is the internet, again, is just sort of crimped into that. Now that's a lower wage industry. That's not typically middle class jobs. But if you talk to any social service agency in the Portland area, and you say if you're working with somebody who has a physical disability, a mental disability, an immigrant, somebody who doesn't speak English very well, someone who just got out of prison, somebody who's just entering the workforce as a teenager, where do you place that person to get them the resume building skills, the career life skills? Where do you put them? And they say retail. And it's really been hurt by the internet. You can't place them at Barnes & Noble anymore. You can't place them at a CD store anymore because they're gone. And you can't really place them at Apple iTunes because that's in Cupertino or something. So there's a lot of struggles in the economy. These changes happen, but unfortunately, we've got all this growth on the upper end, and it requires a college degree. And that's, again, why Portland is so well placed. We have more college graduates than any other place in Oregon. And as these businesses require college graduates to be lawyers and engineers and research scientists and office workers and transportation planners, that's where the businesses go. That's sort of a rambling answer. But yes?
Me?
Sure.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know if you were putting it. I've heard this argument a lot about the diversity issue being a challenge in the future for trade. That people want to trade with people that look like themselves. And I find that in my experience, I've been to a number of cities, I've lived in a number of cities where they've gotten whiter, I guess less diversity, and in fact become more competitive. And I see places that are more diverse. And you can go internationally as well. You can go to Sweden. You can go to,
yeah.
And what a lot of those countries are doing is not worried that there's too many whites around, like there used to be, but actually teaching their people how to speak the languages of those other countries. So in fact, I think people are very interested in compete, in Tokyo, even though there's really no diversity there hardly at all, and Stockholm as well, as long as they're competitive. And I think I always think the argument, the diversity argument, is more to divide us socially. To make us all generically white. I don't feel I'm white. You do. So, and I think that's how the power structure divides us, to make us feel like we're inadequate because of the race that we happen to be born in. But let me tell you something. This city will not do poorly internationally because it's too darn white. And I have black children, by the way. So, and I still argue that comes out of the Ford Foundation rather than it comes out of true economic analysis.
Well,
And
I disagree.
It's political. It's political in your head.
I agree with the political. I agree with the
the
political argument that races used to divide us, and because I see that every day in my Twitter feed. So actually happening again because it's the worst presidential election ever. So I agree with that. I push back again. My wife does international contract work, and she is whiter than I am, and she needed to go to Pakistan about 2 years ago. And she couldn't get a visa because they had the presidential election, which actually went pretty well. But Pakistan was very nervous about the presidential election, so they didn't let anybody into the country. They weren't giving out visas at that time, and there was a multi-million-dollar contract on the line. So my wife and her boss actually roamed the halls of their company, which is about 3 blocks that way, and ran around looking for somebody. And they literally grabbed people and said, like, do you have a visa to go to Pakistan? Like, do you have a visa? And they were like, wait a second, I forgot her name, and I won't pick on her. But they like, isn't she Pakistani? Like, she is Pakistani. And they ran over to her cubicle and said, hey, you're Pakistani, right? And then she's like, yes. Do you have a visa or a dual passport situation? Like, why is my boss asking me about my citizenship status? And no. We need somebody to negotiate a multi-million-dollar contract in Pakistan. And she went because she was a Pakistani citizen and she could physically get into the country. Again, you can learn the language. Huh?
Ironically, as a Pakistani, she probably isn't considered diversity. I mean, this is the kind of anecdotal stuff that we get fed all the time. There are certain circumstances where you might say, well, we need somebody to push that black person to the front of the picture or that Hispanic person so that somebody in one of those countries might feel more comfortable with us. But then again, I find that a lot of places that don't have a lot of those people that look like themselves do very well. And I find the cities that are not necessarily matching the demographic of the world doing better.
I'll take the prerogative as a speaker and say I agree to disagree. And my final comment, which I believe we'll argue in the hallway later, is that the two people I know who located here were Muslim. And they didn't have the mosque that, for whatever reason, it didn't work out. In one case, one of them did move back to Pakistan. That's pretty crazy if you have a full-time good paying job in Portland and you're like, Portland, Karachi, and he went to Karachi. And again, closer to his family, but again, he had trouble integrating his family with the mosque situation. He thought he could sort of raise his kids and keep his family there. And my wife came up to me when he was moving here. She was good friends with him and she worked with him and she sort of helped to recruit him to move to the Portland office. And she asked me to pull the census data up. And she said, how many Pakistanis are there in the entire Portland region? So 2.4 million people. There's 200. And again, that's a disadvantage for us. In Los Angeles, there is the community there. I want to recruit these folks to live and work in our community, and it hurts us. I'm going to move on to another question, but we'll arm wrestle over this later. Yes?
Just in terms of the killing the golden goose, where the talent is attracted to Portland because it's so fabulous and hip and there's great ecology and things to do and music. There's a lot of cultural stuff here. As the economic realities of being a musician or working in music, which tends to be not on any of your high charts, is there any sensibility amongst the business community, even around sort of how do we sustain what makes this the place that we moved here to get the stuff that is attracted by it too?
Well, it's an excellent point. I agree 100%. It's very hard to measure creativity or play. So the best-selling science fiction novel of all time, of course, is Dune. And everybody in this room knows that was written in Oregon by an Oregonian, Frank Herbert. As everybody in the room goes, really? No clue. Nike comes out of tradition. There's a coach in Eugene named Bill Bowerman who coached 55 Olympic athletes. Most college coaches would be privileged to live to train one Olympic athlete. Bill Bowerman trained 55. Because of that, we have Nike. So we have a history with that. We have a culture of that. I don't know how you measure that, but I agree with you.
In economic basement shows, number of bands, number of free PR scenes that I don't have an invitation, black box on the outside, they go and everyone's naked. Those are economic indicators.
I want to party with you.
You definitely do. It's amazing. But I agree that it should, I mean, in some sense it's like, it seems immeasurable, but hilariously, you could measure some of this shit.
Like New York in the 70s and 80s. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, and again, if I knew how to measure it, I would be an incredibly wealthy person. And I wish I could. Richard Florida has made a career out of this. He wrote a book called The Rise of the Creative Class, and he's written essays and books on it. He's a very smart guy, and he tries to sort of he looks at the homosexual population, and he looks at a number of different sort of indicators. You can only sort of look at it sort of like looking at a solar eclipse. You can't look at the solar eclipse. You have to look at a piece of paper with a hole punched through or something. But he's looking at sort of the side effects that you can measure through census data or whatever. And he's done some impressive work, but I really don't feel you can measure the number of parody shows made about a city. Go, well, Detroit has 2 and San Diego has 1. I mean, it's how do you do that? And I don't know how to do that. And again, if I did, I'd be an incredibly wealthy consultant. So if you figure it out, please tell me so I can become rich.
Hey, so what are the maybe top 2 or 3 economically oriented questions that you continually have to misconceptions about Portland that you have to continually correct people on?
Again, and I think I hit most of them, that it's poor. I think the one that it's white, unfortunately, I tried to disprove, and you saw how that worked out. I think that at this point, the economy is growing strongly enough that this didn't come as a massive surprise, that people have internalized that the Portland economy is doing really well. But they get surprised when they go to a community in Clackamas County or Washington County and they don't see that economic prosperity happening. I was born and raised in Eugene. I was there yesterday, actually. I visit almost every weekend, my family there. And Eugene has not recovered the jobs they lost in the recession. So they're essentially, arguably still in recession. That's Eugene. I mean, that's the second largest city in Oregon. It has a university, it has an airport. That's true for so many communities around the state. And one of the reasons I do mention it is because I work for the state of Oregon, and I go to these statewide meetings. And there's somebody there from Coos Bay, and there's somebody there from Portland, a state representative or a legislator or economic development staffer or something, and they're having 2 totally different conversations about what the priorities are around the economy. They're talking right past each other, and I don't think they understand. I don't think that folks in Coos Bay, Klamath Falls, Burns understand that Portland is just economically doing really well. And again, in many cases, they've lived here a long time, and they think of Portland as a poor, sort of failed industrial town that it was in the 80s. It was sort of like Cincinnati or something. And they still sort of have that image in many cases. It's getting better. And on the other hand, so Oregon as a state was the second fastest job growth last year in the United States out of all 50 states. And so when headlines come out like that and people retweet it, it gives this idea that, oh, Oregon's doing great. And you find so many pockets of rural poverty that's just really sort of shocking that, Portland is different from Oregon. I think most people know that. One of the reasons I showed some of these slides, even the city of Portland is very different from Gresham or Vancouver, the suburbs. It's just a very different situation. To your point, the city of Portland, the city council spent most of last year arguing very hard, parts of the city council, for a $20 million annual revenue increase through a street fee to pay for street maintenance. And last year, it became very awkward when they said, we have $50 million extra dollars in the fund. Well, how do you get $50 million extra? Well, when you have tens of thousands of relatively wealthy people moving to a city, buying houses, building condos, building apartment buildings, your tax base is growing incredibly quickly in the city of Portland. So the city of Portland, without raising any taxes at all, saw a huge surge in revenue. And so because of that, we built 2 new parks. There's a new park in Cully last year for the first time. That neighborhood didn't have a park. And there's at least 2 or 3 new parks that are going to be open in the city this year. My father-in-law, a lot of my family lives in Clark County, the Vancouver area. They shut down the parks. And they're just shut down. And I often show in my presentation and do it today. because their tax base has not recovered to where it was before the recession. And again, I have people, I think, that just have misconceptions. When I say Portland, they think Portland region. And I say Portland's doing well, and they go, well, why is my community doing poorly? Are my politicians corrupt? Are they idiots? And I'm saying, well, your pocket is not getting the benefit from this. And you don't have that tax base recovery. You haven't recovered from the recession. And so when your politicians need to slash core services, it's often because the tax base is simply dissipated. And when the city of Portland, unfortunately, it's very awkward for the city of Portland to suddenly say, oh, we need $20 million extra because we're totally broke. They go, but you have $50 million extra in recurring annual revenue just from the new tax base increase. Whoops. I mean, it becomes a problem the other way, where the city of Portland actually has too much money. And so in the middle of still saying, and they're still arguing, many of them are still arguing for this $20 million annual increase in street revenue, they raise the minimum wage for city employees. So we're so broke we need extra money to pay for the streets, and yet we have money to pay for a minimum wage. So again, these political economic arguments are just moving in very different directions. And I hope that some of this helps sort of explain some of those discrepancies that we're seeing.
On the same thread of misconceptions, I was hoping that you could address 2 Portland urban growth myths. So the first being, it's all those damn people from California moving here, which I like to blame them personally. Because I moved here in 2001, so I'm like, I'm not the problem, it's them. And then second, some people I know, artists who are saying, I can't afford the city anymore, I'm just gonna move to Austin, Texas. So are they even better off, or should we just hunker down and wait out the storm and hope that we just get better jobs, or should we all just move to Austin?
So and Austin's doing very, very well. So I wrote an article, I think it just got published. I wrote an article that about Oregon in the 1960s, the economy in the 1960s. It was very interesting. And I sort of looked at Oregon and how it compared to the rest of the country in 1964. And then I looked at, because I have data from like 2014, so it's trying to 50 years apart. And some things are so radically different. In 1964, 1 in 6 jobs in the state of Oregon was working in a factory that involved wood or paper. I mean, it's crazy. 1 in 6 jobs. It was just nuts. Like, not kind of related to the timber industry, working in the timber industry. There's wood right there, and I need to process it. So Oregon was incredibly timber dependent 50 years ago. We're so different now. But a couple things stood out as being the same. Oregon is one of the few states, and Portland one of the few places, where most of the people in any given room were not born in Oregon. That's actually unusual in America. So most states you go to, most people in the room are from the state they're in. I gave a similar presentation here 2 years ago to the Portland City Council. And one of the city commissioners, who will remain nameless because he's running for election, and I don't want to get into it, he really beat me up, and he was trying to beat me up. It was okay, it's fine, tough questions. And he goes, oh yeah, you talk about the educational attainment shooting up, we're getting all these college people moving here, it's big numbers. And he goes, but our high school dropout rate is, some very high, scary statistic, I don't know what it is, but he quoted it at me. And I said, yeah, I mean, our schools are incredibly inadequate to the task of training people for the 21st century economy. I'm not a politician, you are, you should figure out how to fund that, that's not my job. That's true, what are you gonna do to fix it? But then I said, in the 1960s and today, most people in the room moved here. And I said, raise your hand if you were born in Oregon. There's 4 city commissioners and a mayor. Guess how many of them raised their hands? So, and I said, look, you're the best and brightest leadership we have to offer. You had to run for office. I mean, you're the best. And you're not from here either. So, if we decide to be, is it cuckoo birds? I don't know a lot about birds, but what's the bird that steals the eggs from the nest and makes other birds raise its children? Anyway, if we're just going to steal talent instead of developing it, that's a legitimate strategy. Why build Stanford or UC Berkeley or University of Washington, which are awesome, nationally recognized world-class schools, in your community? Why get an MIT going when they just move here anyway? Suckers, paying all this tax dollars to educate your chumps. They'll just move here. So in one way, we're brilliant because we've saved a ton of money in taxes, we have low taxes, and we get the educated workforce because they just move here. So we're geniuses. On the other hand, that's a really crummy way to operate. And as for the California hate, I mean, California, it's the largest state in the country, so it is going to be the largest input. But we get people from all over the country. And I would hope all over the world, which is my aspiration. I want to be a place to attract people from all over the world, not just California. But it's a major input. It doesn't. I'm a native Oregonian. It doesn't bother me at all. I think that as we have more stressors on our infrastructure, I would like to maybe have a conversation about what it means to be a Portlander at some point. And to say, welcome to Portland. We want you here. This is great. Whether you're from California or Pakistan, whatever your color, that's great. Come on in. But we're gonna make you pay taxes so we can pay for our schools. We're not doing that anymore. We're gonna actually, you know, it's great. It's great you love it here. We love it too. We're gonna make you actually pay to live here a little bit, same as everybody else. People who are born here or move here. And you know, we have values as Portlanders about protecting the environment and diversity and respecting each other that we're going to enforce and expect. And we're going to advertise that so that, you know, move here if you believe in those values, come on in. But if you don't, we need to have a conversation. And I think Portland can afford to be choosy at this point. People are lining up to move into this community. That's great. But we need to think about who we bring in. And we also need to think about who we're displacing. So if the African American community is shrinking radically, this is a problem. I mean, if only as an indicator that we're becoming less affordable and less diverse, it really bothers me economically. And I'd like to challenge us to find a way to do that while still, you know, bringing in new talent. Yes?
So you talk about displacement, and I get this overwhelming feeling, and I don't know if it's true, but when you talk about these surrounding counties where their average income is going down and their resources are drying up federally and state-wise, I get this feeling like people are moving into Portland with skills and resources and displacing people from Portland to these communities, and then the resources for them federally are drying up. Is that true?
Yes.
Or is that just me?
Yes.
So like
they're essentially being punished. So when my friends in Portland, and they're my friends, and they write grants to the federal government, and they say, hey, we need help with low-income housing, we need help with skills training for our immigrant population, we need help with all these things, the federal government agency gets the application from Portland, but they also get one from St. Louis, they get one from Cleveland, they get one from Detroit, they get one from Buffalo, New York, and they go, we're not giving money to Portland. You know, it's wealthy and it's doing great. And so we are being overlooked. We're essentially being punished for our success. And that's one concern that I have. The second one is resilience. So eventually there'll be a recession. And thank you for not asking me. This is a common question I actually get asked. I don't know the answer to. When's the next recession coming? And part of that comes up just because it's like, wow, this has been the longest, you know, good stock market. It's been the longest job growth stretch for year after year after year, uninterrupted for many, many decades. You know, and everyone's sort of thinking, so, you know, when's the next one coming? You know, I don't know. But if the next recession comes in the next 2 or 3 years, who's going to get hit hardest? These communities, these outlying suburbs that are lower income, they're going to get hit hard. So those school districts are going to get hit with the hardest tax cuts. As well, they don't have to change taxes. Their revenue base is just going to drop, and those schools are going to see their revenue cut. When you have a recession, the lower skilled, lower income folks are the first ones to be laid off. Higher income professionals who are globally competitive are more likely to keep their jobs. If they disproportionately live in the city of Portland will not get hit as hard in the next recession. Some of the suburbs would get hit very hard to the degree that they once again have to go through and cut core services, fire, police, education. I'm talking about K through 12 to a level that is just, it's going to hurt them long term. They're really cutting into the core of their own communities. The city of Portland probably won't have to do that, but those communities will.
One more question, tying into what you were saying. I've had this discussion with a couple of people recently. The education in Portland is hit or miss, public education. A lot of people are turning to private schools. Is there any kind of tax that goes to private schools that gets to go back to public schools? Like if you're, I don't know, Central Catholic, do you get taxed higher because you're pulling, I mean, is that such a thing?
I don't know.
Sorry.
I don't know. Some people who've been around for a long time might remember something called Ballot Measure 5 in 1990. So I was in high school in Eugene, 1990. And the state did an interesting thing that was a bad idea. And so the voters voted for it. And they slashed property taxes, and they fixed them at a certain level. Unfortunately, that was how we paid for our schools. So that was problematic. To jump in, the state raised taxes, but they mostly reoriented funds, and they sort of sent more and more general fund dollars to the schools. And they did something very interesting. They equalized the money. So if you're a rural kid, they made sure that you got about as much money as an urban kid. So a kid at Jefferson High School, which is disproportionately African American, gets as much money per person as somebody in rural Oregon, because the state kind of comes in and equalizes that. Property taxes in Multnomah County are about 10 times higher than they are in many rural counties. So essentially what they ended up doing was stealing money from urban Oregon, particularly Portland, and sending it out to rural Oregon. So people of color got less money, relatively, even though they're paying higher taxes. And it went out to people paying low taxes who are white. It's probably a coincidence, in rural Oregon. And so we pay higher taxes than our rural friends, and we get by far less money out of that system because of that. The other effect of Ballot Measure 5 is it fixed property tax rates at the same level as 1987. So I own a house that was built in 1904 in the Albina neighborhood in North Portland, and it was beautifully restored. I like it a lot. I'm paying the same property taxes as I would have in 1987 when it was like a crack neighborhood. So my property taxes are actually very, very, very low. We're subsidizing gentrification that way. So that it wasn't, I think, intended that way by Bill Sizemore, but what the effect has been to say, oh, if you buy an old house and fix it up, you keep the property tax rate from 1987. Well, North Portland, a lot of Portland was very, very poor in 1987, so it's an awesome deal. If you build a new house, sorry, it's a new house, it gets assessed at a much higher rate. So that in that way, part of that diversity problem for the city of Portland, we have the most complex property tax structure out of all 50 states by far, but we also have a system that encourages wealthy people to move into low-income neighborhoods and fix up a house because the property tax is sort of a joke. And it punishes people for building new housing, even if it's supposed to be low-income housing or affordable housing. So our housing policy is actually essentially backwards from many social goals that our politicians sort of espouse, and it's like, well, our system is inherently racist, so you sort of have a problem, and it inherently punishes low-income housing construction. But that, again, I don't think that was the intention by Bill Sizemore with Ballot Measure 5 1990. The other reason I mention it, sort of come back to this question over here, I remember when that happened, the discussion among all the politicians was, okay, well, so we've devastated education funding in Oregon, and Oregon still has got nationally some of the lowest education funding for public schools, K through 12, and universities. And they said, well, we'll fix it. And that was 1990. So I just want to say, I realized this last year, I've been waiting a quarter century. And I'm still waiting. I think it's ridiculous. And I don't understand why there still isn't a plan to fix the school system in the state of Oregon. And I don't know who I need to talk to on that one, but there is still, as far as I know, no plan to restore the funding that was lost a generation ago to funding in Portland for education, or in Oregon for education, which is shocking to me. Again, so this is where Oregon has this reputation of being very, very progressive, very liberal, and in fact, you sort of look at the record and you go, wow, we sort of look like Mississippi for education funding. That's difficult to reconcile. But again, as long as we attract smart people from other states, those suckers who pay high taxes, educate their folks, just move here, we win.
I get a little bit frustrated at hearing Portland is the whitest city. I work at 162nd and Stark. I'm frequently the only white person in the room. And this is still City of Portland. And I work with school districts that have 72, 80 languages in the school district. So I really feel like information like that is not telling the real story.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you have looked at data that's more like, oh, this is Multnomah County compared to like the counties that other big cities sit in, because this is not just a Portland trend that the city has become more white and poor people of color pushed out. And I think that in some ways that would create a more accurate story of the situation in this region.
I agree. I'll work on that. I was just looking at, I'm actually doing more research on this. So it's sort of a new field for me to look into the race and ethnicity issues. I was looking yesterday, the city of Gresham is 35% people of color. And so that's very, very different within Multnomah County compared to the city of Portland. If you look at youth, you see some really stark numbers. So 60% of the youth in the city of Beaverton are of color. And again, if you lived in the Portland area for a while, Beaverton was a high-income, wealthy suburb that was fairly white 20 years ago. And now the majority of youth are of color. So that's changing so rapidly, I think it's difficult for people to get their head around. But it's happening as the city of Portland is losing its African American population. And I don't mention that to celebrate it, I mention it to raise an alarm. I mean,
Where are they going? They're going just the reverse migration that happened in the 60s and 70s in every other city. But whites moved out, nobody was really that concerned then. But what we're having, these people aren't going away, they're not dying, they're moving.
They're not going away, but they're losing
and
community.
Once again, what's really surprising is the struggling people in the city are surprisingly white. There is disparity between blacks and whites, and this is where the division is. We should be talking about suffering people, but what we end up talking politically is about the suffering black people. If we bring more black people here and put a public housing in your neighborhood, we would be a lot better off. But the fact is, it's not about race. It's about poor. It's about privilege. It's about being poor in society. It's about division.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I think, do we need to move on from questions?
I know nobody here believes in traditional, in this city where traditional sort of.
Well, we also need to remember that this is the Curiosity Club.
Yeah, and having the same opinion is not curiosity.
Yes.
I see a lot more of this world than you have, and I'm not privileged.
I don't know where the clock is at.
Anytime you want.
What resources exist with you? Like, how do people find out more things from the census or from your department? If there are specific questions that they have.
You can contact me individually. My email address, I think, is on the website. I know it was on the first slide, so feel free to ask me. I know you asked about citations. I have all of that. Trust me, I'm the spreadsheet king, and I've got all the citations for that, so I'm happy to share that. I'm a public resource. I do have a newsletter that comes out once a month. It is more of a business-oriented thing, so just be aware of that. It's just one page, it's mostly charts and graphs, or what you've seen today. And I just, every month, I track a number of these indicators. I also, and again, nobody else brought this up, which is good, but I track leading economic indicators to see if I see any recessionary signs sort of out in the world. But when census data comes out, I sort of spend 2 or 3 days and I kind of turn off the phone and I just sort of go through the newest census data. And I look to see where Portland is an outlier, positive or negative. And when I see that, I put that in my monthly newsletter. So if you want to subscribe, it's free. Send me an email. I have 705 subscribers now. Actually, they put it on the web and now you can subscribe different ways. So I think it's over 1,000. I have a Twitter feed. Occasionally I put things on there, but I'm not very good about that. But ask me, if you ever have a data question, feel free to contact me and be aware I'll probably send you a web link to a government data site or something. But please feel, I am a public resource, so I'm happy to help. All right, one more, and then I'm just going to hang out. I need a second beer. This one's empty, so yes.
I heard that there was a ballot measure that was going to come on in November where companies that make over $25 million will be taxed at 1.7% of their revenue. Mm-hmm. What are you going to vote on that?
Yeah. Well, you get right to it. So I've had one beer, but that's not enough. I'll tell you the truth of that, which is pathetic. I don't know anything about it, and that's on purpose, so that I can't answer questions like that. So it's called rational ignorance. It's actually a thing. I learned about it in college, and that was brilliant. So sometimes it's good not to know about certain things. You're better off, and that's one of the things I don't know. I haven't looked into it. I guess at some point I should look it up. It's on I'm giving a speech in Tualatin to the Chamber of Commerce next week, and that's like the item. and I've just decided, and I'm like the first speaker, and I'm like, I'm not going to even look at it because I don't need to get into it with the Chamber of Commerce. So I don't know yet. Follow me on Twitter, and when I get an opinion, I'll put it up on Twitter someday.
Very quick.
How do economists get off a deserted island? Is this where they assume they have a life raft?
You assume a book.
Yes. We're done. Thank you. You guys are great. I'll stick around if you want to talk.
We're going to come back on April 19th for the third installment of Process, Praxis, and Pitfalls series, which is for the Portland Design Week. We're going to have a panel of Curiosity Club alumni, a few of which are in here tonight, that will share tales of tribulation, triumph from their own personal creative paths. So let's have another round of applause.
Go get the beer.
No, I'm okay.